Okay, I have a big title. Can you hear me? Yes. Can you hear me back there? Okay. I was asked to speak on behalf of the RCD on what the RCD has been doing for the past several years to meet the requirements of the conditional waiver. And I'm titling my talk Community Efforts because the RCD has always worked with the community. The RCD does no work without the voluntary effort of the landowners and the rest of the community. And then I just want to kind of end it at the start and tag on to what Larry and Brian were saying, that the board granted a conditional waiver to this community because of the deep, long, decades-old history that this community has of stewardship of the land. And so I'm going to address some specifics for the board on what we've been doing, but I'm going to kind of start it a little bit back in time because the community has been stewarding the land long before the TMDL and any other regulations came around. So I'm going to address just a little bit of that in my talk. Okay, so the reason we're all here is because the Scott River was listed in 1992 as impaired for sediment and listed in 1998 as impaired for water temperatures. But like I said, we have been addressing our watershed for decades. Oh, wrong direction. Okay, so, and then, well, okay, I'll go with this. You know, the RCD was established, I believe, in 1940, right around there. It has always worked with NRCS as a sister agency. It worked with landowners here. You know, everybody here knows Alvin Lewis has been doing projects in the watershed for decades. The French Creek WAG is an example that I think everybody in the watershed can agree was a successful community effort. The WAG formed in 1990 and did a lot to improve the health of French Creek, which supports, you know, anadromous fish has coho in it every single year. And we have landowners there who are still working to improve French Creek. I think some of them are going to speak today. So that's an effort that's 21 years old now and still moving forward. The Watershed Council formed as the CRIMP in 1992 to help the community address some of these issues and the fact that, you know, we saw the regulation was coming and the community tried to deal with it before it got here. And then just, you know, various landowner efforts. I couldn't begin to address all of them. Hopefully some people will speak on behalf of the community later this morning. So just to put it there, the community has always worked on these issues on their own voluntarily. The things that have caused the river to be listed for temperature and sediment, some of it is, a lot of it is historic, man-made alterations going back to the 30s when they dredged Callahan in the East Fork and the South Fork and McAdams Creek. Those are historic alterations to the channel that can't be fixed overnight or in 10 or 15 years. We have historic natural things like periodic floods, 100-year events, 300-year events. And then we have a hydrograph that goes from drought years to flood years and back-to-back drought. And all of these things are very challenging to the task of repair and restoration, which is essentially what the Water Board is asking. So the kind of gross simplification of the TMDL requirements is that by 2045, the Scott River corridor should have an adjusted potential shade, basically what the river could potentially have. It's they want trees along the Scott River, I guess, would be the simplification, and I'll talk about it later. And then in terms of sediment within the conditional waiver, the board just asked people responsible for the riparian corridor to take necessary actions to prevent, minimize, and control sediment discharges and elevated temperatures, which is basically, keeping livestock out of the creek, not destroying your riparian vegetation, doing things to make the riparian vegetation maintained or better, which are things that our community has been doing since at least the early 90s. And just for a brief, both historical context and to illustrate the magnitude of what we're talking about, this is the Scott River at Horn Lane looking north towards Fort Jones. And the picture in the top there is the Scott River in 1956 after some flood events. and then the river almost 50 years later in 2002, and there's a change, but not a phenomenal change over 50 years, but there's improvement. The river improves, and it's improving, and I will maintain that the river has been and continues to improve and not degrade. And then this is Fay Lane, a 30-year difference. Fay Lane, same thing, looking north to Fort Jones. There's improvement there, but improvement takes time under the conditions that we have. And then this is the Scott River at Serpa Lane, and I included this picture because in 1989, I believe, the landowners of the Scott River opened their properties up and let Alvin Lewis do an inventory of the Scott River main stem, the whole length of it, and then a significant planting project was done up here, and you can see the trees, and these trees are 20 years old. It took 20 years to get those kind of trees along the Scott River, and they do provide shading, especially in the late afternoon in the summertime, but that was something that 20 years ago we started that. And then this is probably difficult to see, but this is an aerial photo of Mill Creek, which is one of our tributaries that has a lot of landowner effort and good habitat. And the picture on the left was an aerial photo taken in 1993, and then the one on the right is 12 years later in 2005, and you can see trees coming in, you can see an improvement in the vegetation, and then this picture is the river, right around there as it is now. Almost complete canopy cover, coho habitat. It's a very good piece of river, and I think to kind of build the thought, Larry talked about the uplands, and we have to work on the uplands to help the Scott River, and we have focused a lot on the tributaries of the Scott River, because if the tributaries are feeding good water to the Scott River, then we're moving in a good direction. So we've had landowners do lots of work on the tributaries and the Scott River. So that's just kind of the summary. We've had decades of stewardship here that began before the TMDL, and hopefully someday will be delisted and we'll continue forward stewarding our land. So the specific TMDL things in the work plan that I'm addressing are just the ones that are just community or specifically ask the RCD to do something. And so the topic being temperature and vegetation, the 4 kind of specific things that were asked for in the work plan was to plant riparian trees and minimize the removal of vegetation, minimizing activities that might impact vegetation. The second thing that was asked for was for the RCD and NRCS to assess what has been done in terms of planting, repair, and restoration, and just see if it's been effective or what would work better. The third thing was asking, I guess, the community to organize a workshop or educational effort about riparian conservation and restoration. And the fourth thing in this category was to request the Watershed Council to make a strategy and schedule for riparian restoration based on pretty much number 1 and number 2, what we've done, what we know works, where we think the community can go along these lines. So to start with, and then there was a specific thing in there about grazing, and the water board asked parties responsible for grazing to take actions to prevent, minimize, and control sediment and waste discharges. So what we've done to date in terms of the first thing that was requested was planting trees and minimizing removal of vegetation. Since the 90s, landowners have installed exclusion fencing and planted at least 300 acres of riparian vegetation in the Scott River. We estimate that 90% of the Scott River that has livestock present is fenced. We don't have a hard number because people put fence in on their own. They don't tell us. We don't know, but they're doing the right thing. So we're pretty sure that the vast majority of the Scott River where livestock could reach the river has some type of livestock fencing in place. In 2010, the RCD and landowners installed 1.63 miles of additional fence on tributaries in some key places and planted around 5 acres. In the past 5 years, the Fish and Wildlife Service has worked with, I believe they told me, 5 or 6 landowners in the Scott River and planted 30 acres and fenced an additional 1,800 feet. And then hopefully there's landowners that are going to talk today about things they've done on their own without our help. We have plans to move forward. We have grants from the Fish and Wildlife Service, NOAA, and the Water Board 319H process to do additional planting in the river, predominantly on the Scott River, although we'll be doing some work in tributaries, in places where we think there's a high likelihood of success, because we don't want to waste money planting things where it won't work. And I didn't put this up here, but we have funding to maintain these plantings for at least 3 years, hoping to give them that extra chance of success. Okay, the second thing that I listed that was requested was for the RCD and NRCS to do an assessment of what has been done, where, and how it was effective. And so in 2008, we had funding from the Fish and Wildlife Service, and Preston Harris went out and bothered a whole lot of landowners and went out on their property and counted the trees we planted and assessed which ones survived and which ones didn't, and how robust they were. And we looked back at our records on how we did the plantings and what year they were done. Were they done in a drought year? Did the deer eat them all? And we're using that information to pick locations where we think, yes, planting trees here will survive, or we know trees survived in certain areas of the Scott River, so we're going to plant it around that and extend the corridor. So we're using all the work we've been doing for 15 to 20 years to make better decisions on how to do this in the future. And so when we did that assessment in 2008, we came up with additional recommendations for areas where we think it's more likely to succeed. And then we have the organizing a workshop or educational effort, which is something the Watershed Council and this community has done many times. We've had the NRCS Riparian Service team out on visits before the TMDL went into place. We've done it many times. We'll probably do it again, but in 2008, the RCD and NRCS co-hosted a bioengineered stream bank workshop, and we brought in NRCS's experts, and all the workshop participants did a demonstration project on the Scott River itself on about 300 feet of river. And I didn't get a picture this spring, but this is the spot a year after the planting was done. And it's still there, and it's still growing. And then the TMDL action plan asked the Watershed Council to prepare a strategy and schedule for restoring and preserving the riparian corridor. And this has not been done yet, but the RCD received funding through the 319H program to develop this plan, and the next steps would be to take the information we have from the analysis we did and work with members of the community, NRCS and others, and come up with a plan that will really work for the Scott River over the next 100 years. And then, like I said, this information came from the repair and restoration analysis we did, and information from Dr. Harder's groundwater study that he addressed yesterday. And then these were other things that the Water Board asked us to do that I'm not going to address because they were addressed yesterday, but we were asked to develop a study plan. The county was asked to do so, and Thomas Harder's been working very successfully on that. The action plan asked the community to develop water conservation practices. That's an ongoing thing in this community. People are always working on that issue. And then the last thing that I saw in the work plan was that the Water Board wants us to work with them on these things, and I think we've been working with the Water Board since the TMDL went into place. So to kind of summarize, the community, the RCD and the community, our work on planning and analysis, we're always looking at what we've done to make sure we're not wasting resources or time, or landowners' effort and time. And so we're going to develop the strategy and schedule for repair and restoration within the next couple of years, a year or two. And then we have the ongoing work with the groundwater study plan in UC Davis, and the county, as they talked about yesterday, formed a groundwater advisory group. And then we have been doing riparian fencing and planting for over 20 years, and we will continue to do so at places that we feel it will be successful. And that's it.